Are we ready?
Yep.
Check sound, 1, 2. Let's see. Okay. Well, good day, friends. Welcome back for another episode of our podcast on the Discipleship Reframed. Today, we're continuing our discussion on the two-lane highway, but this week we're taking a look at the personal lane. But as always, I'm joined today by my good friend and partner, John Lewis, as well as my senior pastor from New Life, John Erickson. And we'll give John a chance to introduce himself. As we get started today, John, I just wanted you to, if you could give us a kind of a catch, John Lewis, if you could give us a catch up today on where we've been and kind of where we're coming to today as we, again, talk about the two-lane highway.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. It's good to be with you and John. And we have been, over the last number of sessions together as a group, walking through this topic of how do we create a framework, to build with the Holy Spirit's work and help in our communities, a culture of discipleship. We've looked at everything from asking, what does it mean that we are making disciples? What is discipleship? What is a culture of discipleship? How do we name outcomes? What does it look like? And we've explored the trilogy of heart, head, and hands is part of a deeper look at that. We've considered traveling with people over, it's a lifetime journey from different stages. And so last week we jumped into, I think, closer to the how question is that, okay, once you have a sense of the outcomes and the progression, then we're creating in this two-lane highway a way to like categories, so to speak. If you think about like an American football team, you probably can divide all of your players and your teams into either offense, defense, or special teams, right? And in many ways, what we're saying in this two-lane diagram is that all the activities of the church perhaps could be clustered, around program, around personal lane, and around maybe what we're going to talk about next week about repair. And so, again, we're using this image of a two-lane highway and a discipleship car that we are journeying in together as a community down the long road of becoming more like Jesus.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think intuitively, I think all of us can relate to this idea of two lanes going down. There's program and personal. But as we noticed last week, when we really broke down the program lane, we can see that, and just for those that are listening, I mean, program lane definitely has its, there are specific characteristics about it that talk about size. When we think about program, you're getting into larger groups of people that could range still from a small gathering of 6 to 12, but still there's a certain level of instruction and inspiration and so forth that can only, that you have a limit on. And as you grow larger, this is about all you can do, but they're still good for certain things. And I think what we found is just over the years, the church has leaned heavily more into the program lane to try to really reach in a good way as many as is possible. But unfortunately, there's been some detriment in really putting a lot of our eggs in that program lane. And so there's been a rediscovery, it seems almost, of the importance of this particular personal lane. John, you alluded it to there, just, of a American football team and how discombobulated it would be if it only had an offense. Every time the other team got on the field, they would score.
Well, right. And to build on that analogy, you can imagine what would happen, Brandon, if new plays were given, when the offense gathered, and then you went out in the field and the coach would never take any individual time to help somebody figure out what that means for them in their position, right? And so there's this going back from the program, the instruction for the group, but then working it out with individual players as they live into those plays, so to speak. And I just think that you look at Jesus's ministry, he was constantly going back and forth from these larger teachings, experiences to, hey, let's debrief together. Let me speak specifically to you and how you've interpreted that, etc. So yeah, that's what we're trying to ask is how do these that so easily and naturally operated with Jesus when he lived with his disciples and the things that he chose to do, how do we in our day and age, and how is COVID in 2020 forcing us to integrate these two aspects of ministries in ways we haven't before, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think that's a good reason why we brought on John Erickson today. I've been walking with John as he's been my senior pastor over the last year, and he's brought me on as pastor of discipleship there at the church. And he and I have been walking together through the Discipleship Reframed, and I think he's got an amazing story to share with us. So John, if you could spend some time to introduce yourself. As far as we've walked together, I know you've had the program lane, in a sense. You've gone to Bible college, you've had all that kind of education, but a lot of what you and I have spent time talking about, and a lot of wisdom that you've given me, it felt like, at least to me, that it's come from a very personal relationship that you had with a previous pastor. And so, yeah, if you could introduce yourself and share a little about that story and those two lanes working together.
Yeah, for sure. My name, as Brandon said, is John Erickson, the pastor of New Life Church in University Place, Washington. I've been the pastor here about a year, and my story is unique in that the very first week that I announced that I was being installed as the pastor here was the first week we were shut down. So I announced it live from my living room with my kids playing on their iPads upstairs, trying desperately for them not to make noise as we go through that. So obviously it's a very different environment than how it's been modeled to me in the past. And so you're forced to go into a situation that's really uncomfortable. But as you said, I feel like I was well prepared for what was facing me. Like a lot of people, I've had amazing mentors in my life, different people who have spoken into me. And it's amazing how each one of those were important for a season. But the last relationship I just came from was my pastor, Pastor Lance Powers, the pastor of Puget Sound Foursquare right down the street. And he really, he met with me a lot. He met with his staff every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. And I asked him, can I meet with you every week? I was the only person on staff he met with every week because I asked him to. Now that I am a senior pastor, I realize how much that cost him. That's a lot to invest in somebody. But I was just like a puppy dog, and that relationship, that personal, there's no program that we went through. There's no book. It's real life in the trenches. There were tears shared in that meeting. There was prayers. There was, frustrations. Now that I'm in the role of the captain's chair, I have a lot much more grace for him than I had at the time. But really, I feel like as we kind of transitioned from that program lane to the personal lane with COVID and how we've had to adjust, he prepared me very well for showing what true mentorship looks like one-on-one in the trenches with somebody sharing life consistently.
Wow, that's really good. So you mentioned COVID and having to launch your first sermon as senior pastor from your living room. How has been the struggle with the fact that really once COVID locked everybody down, the program lane, our ability to do that just up and went bye-bye, And so how did you wrestle with that, knowing that you had great mentoring skills, but this was not a terrain that you were really prepared for entering? It wasn't, or you didn't think that this would come about, right?
Sure. Yeah, it's good. I know you use the example of kind of the football example. I kind of like to think of the personal and program lanes. I thought of it. I like to lift weights, and something that I was always told growing up is never skip leg day, right? In weights, we want to be, I want the big muscles. I want the really big pecs, the biceps. I want the washboard abs. But when it comes time to doing squats and lunges and leg extensions, it just is something you don't want to do. So I don't know if you've ever been to the gym and you've seen people who do skip leg day. They look very great from the top half, and then downstairs it's little chicken legs. Well, to be honest with you, I think at least the way I viewed church ministry, and I think from the culture in general, we kind of heavily rested as church on that program mindset, and we skipped the proverbial leg day in that personal one-on-one. So what I found myself, as we had a transition and all programs are shut down, we're having to work out muscles and do things like squats, do these things that we never really have had to do before. And we needed to exercise them regularly, and it was difficult. It was sore. It took time to really get into that mode because we've almost let some of that atrophy.
Yeah. I remember you and I having a conversation where you felt like you weren't doing enough. And then through the course of the conversation, you told me you were meeting with 12 different people throughout the week. And I was like, bro.
Yeah. Well, I went back. I was like, well, on our church website, we have no programs. We have nothing to announce on Sunday, you know what I mean, that we're doing. And then as you wisely dug in a little bit, it's like, what have you been doing this week? And I pulled on my calendar and I was like, well, yeah, this is my 12th meeting this week, one-on-one of a church of 50 people. I mean, it you know, and I was like, oh, well, I guess it's okay to not have things on my website and actually just disciple people.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, I think, John, it would be really fun to hear a little bit about what you actually ended up doing in those times, whether you set out to do it, whether you fell into it, maybe just explore, paint a picture with us, I guess, of where those conversations went and and I guess the follow-up would be, where did you see fruit coming from that? What was the impact maybe on you, on the person, on the relationship, you know, especially coming in as a new person?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we're a smaller church. So I had the luxury, probably at 50, 60 people, I really had the luxury of being able, with the amount of time that I had throughout the day, just to simply call people on the phone. And so what I did is I literally went to our Planning Center app, found people, and then I would just call them. And it's interesting because in a normal church setting, you see 50 people on a Sunday, right? And if you have larger churches, you see much more than that. But your time is spread very thinly amongst everyone. And while there is a connection, it's not a deep connection. So what I found myself doing is calling people just on the phone, old school. And I'll be honest with you, it was weird. It was weird for me to call, because when people saw that Pastor John is calling you, people were like, is everything okay? Is somebody
It's like going
hurt?
to the principal's office.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh.
what?
And I talked to a lady who has an amazing lady named Mary, and she has been a Christian almost all her life. And she said, I'll be honest with you, I've been a Christian 50 years. Never once in my 50 years has a pastor ever called me just to see how I was doing without needing something. And while that was a very sweet comment meant to make me feel good, as it was, it actually really broke my heart after I got off of that. And I said, I've been part of a system that has been okay, allowing the short little exchanges on Sunday to masquerade as real discipleship. Well, you listen to me preach for 42 minutes on a Sunday, so that's real discipleship. But as far as the positive consequences that I found, it's amazing what a 20-minute conversation on the phone will do for somebody. I don't need to have a conversation 20 minutes on the phone every week. But you know, I've probably called Mary 3 times in the past year, 15, 20 minutes each. And I have a connection with her that it's over the course, it's an hour of me spending my time. It's really not that much, but the connection that I have is powerful. And it's weird. It almost seems like the trust that we have has been on like double time or fast forwarded, because there's a real honest connection that she feels that like, wow, this guy really cares about me. And I called again, you know, 6 months after I called her the first time, and she said, are you just calling to say hi again? And I said, absolutely. And then we talked. So I found that it has changed my position as a new pastor coming in. I think people view you as a chaplain, right? It's like, well, I don't know you. You'll preach if I need someone to, you know, perform a wedding or funeral. But what having that one-on-one connection, people, has changed my view of them to their pastor, I think much quicker than it would have normally. I think it would have taken a couple years of the normal model, but one-on-one, sitting down with someone makes them feel like I am their pastor, and I've changed that relationship quicker.
Yeah, and I can even imagine, John, them wanting to listen to your sermons more.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And in fact, then you have a way of preaching with confidence that what you're saying is maybe speaking to the people. So there's a great example of how these program and personal lanes work together. They feed together back and forth. So, no, that's good.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think I can speak on some other things because I exist at the church with John, and he may be a little bit more humble about some things are going on. But even the integration, you know, of the idea of this personal and program lane, as John Lewis, you just mentioned, the mission of the church is something that most churches have, but the way that John has chosen to integrate it has not only been from the front during a sermon, but also during discussion questions as we've changed the model of service up to kind of move towards this idea of program and personal. We don't just have a talking head in front. We've decided that table discussion is good sometimes. And so we've done a series that way and are moving off of that, but it's also a discussion within our staff meetings that leads the staff meeting forward. And then it's the center by which each personal meeting rotates, that we have these ideals, these values, this particular mission of wanting to advance the kingdom of God. And so the weaving of these two lanes, I feel has been done very well. And I wonder if how much COVID has been a response of that. That's just my little plug. And so, John, as you think about John Erickson, as you think about, again, things beginning to relax, right? Things kind of going back to a sense of normalcy, whatever that might be. People are maybe not having to wear masks, the social distancing can come back. How do you see the future of some of these two lanes continuing to work together as you began working those leg muscles and have seen the benefit of doing that? What are there? I mean, I know you don't have specific ideas, but how do you see that influencing you continuing going forward?
Yeah, I think it's just a great example just to kind of start over with a clean slate. When you literally remove everything, you're forced to remove everything. You can really start with where we're going. And we've been talking about that in our staff meetings, as you know, Brandon, about like, what are your dreams? Like, rather than saying, what is the book study you want to do, right? What is the children's curriculum? Like, what are your dreams? So it has allowed us to be in a position to be able to dream again. And and it's funny, man, there's been times I've been on church staffs where nobody's dreaming for years. That's not saying that the mission isn't moving forward, but I think that there's something powerful with just dreaming and looking towards something. So for us, what exactly that looks like is, I think that what's critical, what I've seen, when everything shut down, everyone was allowed and given margin to dream. I think that's got to be so important in anything that we do forward and coming back. I'm not willing to give up that part. And listen, everyone's in different stages of life. If you're in a personal crisis with your family or just struggling, you're not going to dream. But I think COVID has shown me the importance of that, having passion and dreaming and going forward. And so I think that's the first thing, as far as what COVID has really told me. If you go around and ask your staff, what are your dreams, and you've got just nothing, that's an indication that, hey, maybe we are not working our leg day. Maybe we are focusing a little bit too much on programs and missing what we're doing. And secondly, I think the big thing, and you guys call them outcomes, right? So I think for us, what is the goal? I really felt like, for me before, this is me talking, John, as the pastor, my goal was to get somebody in the program. That was the goal, right? If I'm going to do a discipleship program, if I can get 25% of the church in this program, I did it. We have arrived. However, I've really seen, which I think I understood before, but I didn't really understand the intent of it, is that should never be the goal. That is the starting line. The goal is 100 meters down after you sprint. And so for me, it's really, and that's where I don't have the answers, but we can't go back to having participation as the goal, which I felt like it was before. COVID has really taught me, when you're forced to make that one-on-one connection because you have no other option, you can't give that up. And that's the difficulty, because it's easy to count the heads, or to count the tithe, or to count the X amount of dollars we raised for this missions project as the success. But how do we see that as the starting point? And where do we want them to really end?
Yeah, and I think to your point, John, it's interesting. If we define success as participation in program, we'll never work out our legs, right? But if we define it as character development and skills, we will quickly, like any football coach, realize you need both the program, the things you do as a group, and the individual attention. Otherwise, simply going back and reviewing the plays in a group will not move us forward, to use the football analogy. Just more sermons, more Bible studies, more participation will have a very limited effect in terms of the outcomes of personal and corporate transformation. So I think that's when you try to think about Jesus's ministry apart from the individual time with people, it would have been dwarfed. It was the multitudes that in the end wanted to kill him. We're in Lent, you know, the Palm Sunday. They didn't get it. It was those who had personal time with him, along with the program time, the teaching and the watching. Those were the people that ultimately took the mantle of the church and moved it forward. So I think that I love that idea that we have to redefine success as outcomes in people's lives, not participation in programs.
And that's hard because it takes a lot of work. You know what I mean? It takes work for me to stand and call people in my church. You know what I mean? It takes time. I had to block that on my calendar. You know what I mean? I had sections on my calendar, you know what I mean, that I just said connection was my little phrase. It's much easier to do it the other way. And sometimes more satisfying. In the moment, it's great to have the party. You know?
Well, it gives you an appreciation for Jesus, realizing that from the beginning, the bulk of his ministry was giving himself away to a few, who then eventually worked with him to do the program, to distribute the loaves. And so once you realize the goal and the means to get there is not possible with the old model of ministry where the pastor does everything, you know, where the pastor is the primary mover shaker to create the service, etc., then your job description changes, John, right? Then the work that you started to do at COVID, its beginning of meeting with people, then becomes a paradigm to say, who are the key leaders, you know, as who are the people that I need to invest in, who then will turn around and invest in others, who will invest in others. So it's a paradigm shift from top to bottom.
It is. Leaders, we reproduce what we are. You can't expect the people serving under you to do anything different than what you do. Right. If you make programs a big deal, they'll make programs a big deal. If you make discipleship a big deal, they'll make discipleship a big deal. If you make kids ministry a big deal, they will make kids ministry a big deal. Yeah. So you have it really starts with me and whatever I do, and you know they produce the good and the bad, unfortunately. And so that's my hope is exactly right. I don't want to be the only guy who does the ministry here. But I have to model it, and that means picking up and calling Mary at our church.
Yeah.
John, you know, we've kind of hinted around it, and I wonder if this is a barrier too to a lot of leaders and whatnot moving into a personal lane. But I just kind of wanted to ask, especially knowing a little bit about your journey, when you open yourself up to the personal lane, you literally open yourself up far more to what people think of you and what people may think of your ministry. And so a lot of us may keep people at a distance and stick with the program to insulate ourselves from some of the realness of life that might come out there. How have you dealt with some of the harder conversations or the staff just totally, you know, making poopy diapers and needing to clean that up?
You know, it's funny. It's you're right that when you have a deeper relationship with more people, the lows get lower. But I would also, and that's a bummer. I could see why one would want to protect themselves from that as pastors. You know what I mean? As really any leader, you know, we are criticized. You know what I mean? You hear about the failures and you hear about what isn't going right. But also the highs, I think, are much higher when you've invested personally in somebody and you see the growth. Even like with you, Brandon, you know what I mean? Like with working, even with you this past year, I believe we both grown like mutually in this. And so it's so great to see like, wow, the time that I'm investing in you is really, and the time you've invested in me, we've both grown. I had a conversation with Pastor Lance, my pastor, 2 weeks ago, and was just how much he was like, I'm so proud of you. All that time that he spent, it really was coming to fruition. But it's true. It's much easier. There have been people, a couple of people who were going to New Life Church, and now I don't see them anymore. I don't know where they're at. I assume that they're not coming back with COVID. Who knows? They may show up. Those people are like, hey, that's fine. You know, if they found a church for them, that's great. There are also people that I have invested some time into, sitting one-on-one. And when they sit across from you and tell you, yeah, I just don't think you're a really good pastor for me, that's hard. So you do open yourself up to that. It is difficult. And I feel like I'm getting better at it, but I would also say that it creates a broader spectrum of emotion. While that was, I've had some very low points this past year from people that I have invested to that I'm like, man, I wish I would have never had these 3 or 4 meetings with you, because now you're you're expressing your frustration. On the flip side, it's been way more positives. And it's working through, prayer, the Holy Spirit, therapy, journaling, all that stuff to really exchange the mind, right? Romans 12, and really move to the positive.
Yeah. Brandon, this is really good. I'm wondering if you could allow me just to, as a way of moving towards, summarizing and closing this session, just to come back to a couple of summary comments about the personal lane and comparing it to the program lane. It's almost like this helps, at least it's helped me, especially when I think about my own experience meeting with people, being mentored, being a mentor, as well as watching the life of Jesus. When we're talking about a smaller setting of me meeting with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people, those settings are much more natural for me to let down my agenda and start with the other person. Where programs force me to say, what's the need? We're going to meet it. We're going to anticipate it. The personal lane is a place where we can let the story and the agenda of the other person dictate the starting point. And it's a place that invites listening more than speaking, perhaps, storytelling more than principles and summaries, like tell me your story. It invites vulnerability and authenticity to be experienced in a way that's often hard in a larger group. And it really, in some ways, it's so good for me because I'm a type A, by trade. It's like the initiation is not resting on me to make this happen. And you think about one of the dangers of being in the program lane primarily is that we begin to think that we're the primary movers of ministry, where the personal lane reminds me to let down, remember that God's already working in this person. It has never depended all on me. And it's like a treasure hunt. I get to go and discover what God's doing in that person and be a responder. So it's the opposite of organization in some senses. It's organic. And those of us who are in places of leadership of organizations or churches are often more taught and rewarded for organizational leadership than organic leadership. But then if I look at my life and I go, what's changed me the most? Often it's those organic, spontaneous, intimate moments where somebody was able to, like Jesus in his one-on-ones, bring it home. The rich young ruler, sell everything you had. That was the comment that I needed to hear. Those are the moments that often I'm most loyal to. So I hope that this is, in some ways, as John has shared, as we've been sharing, that there's a sense that this is maybe an opposite hand dribble, to use another athletic, for some of us. Some people, though, may say, yeah, discipleship is just one-on-one. I hate the program. I hate the organization. That feels stuffy. It feels unauthentic. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that Jesus wove these two kinds of experiences together in an organic, life-giving way that took organization, but changed the world and still is a model for us today going forward. So just wanted to highlight some of those differences and maybe that spawn a couple of last comments, or John, as you think about things going forward in your church, or, anything last things you might want to say in light of your experience, past, present, or future here with the personal lane.
Yeah, I love all the analogies. Look at we have great analogies. It's like every other thing. No, I definitely, for me, I think what's exciting is kind of the process of discovery, I think, on what exactly this looks like. You know what I mean? And it's difficult because in every new stage of the journey, you're going to have to learn new stuff. So, I can still claim I haven't quite been here a year yet. I've got another couple of weeks. But me being new you do one-on-one discipleship personally and a little differently. But then I'm going to start being into the veteran where people know me. And then that's going to have to change a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Same thing with a different makeup of a church. A church is a living, breathing organism. So there's going to be people who have left and new people who are coming. It's going to look very differently. And so it kind of what you said, the one size fits all approach to the other side, it's constantly going to require assessment, prayer, looking at it. We have a value at our church called sacrificing the sacred cows, right? That constantly looking and saying, hey, what are the sacred cows? What are the things we're not willing to sacrifice? We're not willing to prune for fear that we'll lose what we have without realizing what's there in the future. So I think for someone my personality, it's fun and exciting because it allows us to create and do new things. But it's also hard because, part of me likes to plan and just say, hey, here's our system. Here's our, you know what I mean? Let's just get this thing rolling and let's just kind of go. And so it's just that constant reassessment that we really have to do. And I think that's the job of good leadership. Constantly reassessing and what you're doing and is what we're doing still serving the purpose we want it to serve.
Now, I like that. I think about another metaphor of parenting, and you're a young parent, John. I mean, you kind of know that your one-on-one time with your kids when they're 1 or 2 or 3-year-old, that's really not going to work when they're 10.
Right.
And so not only do we need to preach differently, or teach different topics as our disciples grow, but even how we meet with them changes. I love that, and it's a developing thing that makes us rely on the Spirit, but also keep learning. Love it.
Yeah, I think I just, for me, I want to add on this too. We've been saying it, but I want to just put a finer point on it. John Lewis and I are presenting this idea of the program and personal, but I really would like to say that I don't believe that those are options. What you choose to do within those and the weight of which you're going to lean in different seasons and your particular group. But as John Erickson said earlier, like you can't ignore leg day. I mean, if you're going to have a well-rounded workout, you cannot ignore parts of your body or your parts of your health and expect to come out with a good product. And so for some, as you can't throw out one of the other lanes, it doesn't work that way. I believe that Jesus created these ways. How we choose to fill them, how we choose to live them out and use our giftings and our callings will look differently. But these lanes must be brought in as we've used parenting. Imagine only using one or the other in that, and how lopsided some things would be in many different areas. These are crucial, and our process of discipleship has got to be thought through both of these types of lanes.
And what's a gift for John Brandon, for John Erickson, is that he's come in and he's started from the beginning a new way, and in a season where COVID has affirmed that. But I think about other pastors who maybe have been in the program lane is the dominant lane, and how do you move your job description and your expectations, how you're evaluated, to integrate the two more? You're going to have to let go of something. Some things are going to have to suffer. Someone else's. And so that's the challenge, I think, for some of those listening who will come out of maybe a slightly different, environment of how long they've been at a church. So these conversations have to be owned by the team. People have to, but as you lead out and spend some one-on-one time with your leaders, they're going to see the value, and they're going to work with you to create a new sense of expectations for your role in the church as one of the leaders.
Yeah. John Erickson, is just the last question to close out based on what John Lewis said there. Would you have any advice for pastors that are looking, that are staring at that question in the face and go, and not in any bad way, but going, holy cow, my whole life has been based around programs. I've got to make a switch if I want to see, the kingdom come. What might you share with them if you had a captive audience that was listening?
If only I had a captive audience who would maybe be listening to this. That's a good question. I think I would go back to kind of what we talked about earlier, that you reproduce what you are, right? Sometimes I have 4 young children, and a lot of times the way that my kids will yell at each other out of anger, I'm like, ooh, they're doing me. Like, they have seen the way that I have reacted out of my frustration to them, and they are just modeling exactly what I've done. So I would go back to that and say, listen, here's the great part. You can't, flip of a switch change the entire culture of your church and the entire culture of your leadership team. But what you can do is change the way you act, and you will begin to reproduce that. And so what that would be my advice is, rather than it's very tempting for us as strong leaders to get everyone put up a whiteboard and say, this is the new plan, this is what we're going to change it, you guys do it. My advice would be, do it for 6 months and don't tell anyone what you're doing. Sit down and make it about discipleship. Start calling the Marys of your church and just the random families or the people that you have, and your staff may have less access to you, and say, well, what do you mean I can't meet with you? It's like, well, I'm meeting some of these people. When you begin to model that, you will reproduce it, and people will begin to see it. And then pull out the whiteboard at your staff retreat, pull out the whiteboard in your staff meetings and say, this is what I'm doing. Let's transition to this. And by then, people will have seen the fruit of it, seen maybe some of the pains that you've gone through, but will understand how to do that. And that is how you begin to change that big shift, as you begin to change the direction of that big barge very slowly. It's got to start with you. And you're not going to see the type of returns that you want to see unless you practice it and model what you want them to do.
That's good.
Well, that's an amazing answer. Thank you, John. I hope there are others that hear that, chew on that, take that to God, begin to pray on it, and really begin to start integrating leg day, bringing in the personal lane if it's not there, or if maybe the program lane's your leg day, and we need to balance those things out. And so it's been so good having both of you on today for the discussion and the questions. John, is there any final thoughts you want to close on?
Yeah, I just would say it's been great to be with John. I love the idea that the first step is not to go back to my church and start a mentoring program. The other thing I'll just say is, looking to next week, Brandon, we're going to take the third part of that program, personal lane image. We're going to add one more piece, and then we're going to actually have some conversation deeper about how to integrate all of these together in a way, just like offense, defense, special teams on a football team integrate together over a course of a game. That's the next question we'll explore in the following session.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Well, you heard it there, folks. Join us next time as we continue to integrate these lanes and move down the how of how we continue to create cultures of discipleship and a framework. It's been good with you all. We'll talk to you guys later.